everybody, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live on the topic of key supply chain skills of the future. I'm your host, Shubh Faujdar, Global Head of Learning Solutions for Alcott Global. And today we have two amazing guests with us who would be breaking down what are the key skills of supply chain for the future. They are also the authors of the best selling book called Source to Sold. So if you haven't heard about the book or you haven't checked it out, please do so as well. So our first guest today is Knut Alicke. He is the partner at McKinsey and Company, part of the global supply chain leadership team, and a visiting professor of supply chain at the University of Cologne. Knut is very passionate about supply chain and also for upskilling people in this industry. Welcome, Knut.
Great to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation, Shubh.
Great. And our next guest is Radu. And if you are watching this live, you're watching it over his LinkedIn profile. Radu Palamariu is the Managing Director of Asia Pacific and Europe of Alcott Global and the Global Head of Supply Chain and Logistics Practice. He has been working with C-level and top management executive search assignments with top Fortune 500 companies. He's also my boss, so everything you hear about him today, please take it with a pinch of salt. So welcome both of you, and congratulations on the grand success of Source to Sold.
Thanks, Rube.
Great. So before we dive into the topic of the key skills of supply chain of the future, I want to make a very quick announcement as well, which is very much in line with today's topic. So at the Alcott Global Supply Chain Academy, we have recently launched the certificate of completion since last week. So if you have done any of our courses, you can now reach out to us and get your certifications as well. We have a quick 30 seconds video prepared for you, and the team will now play the video. All right, so now that you've seen the video, let's dive into the key supply chain skills of the future. So let me ask by asking the very core question, Knut, what do you think are the most important skills that supply chain professionals will need to possess in the future, and why?
Yeah, very good question. And let me kind of split the answer in two. One is, let's say, I would say more the traditional way of looking at supply chain, which we need to understand, and the other one is what we also found out in the Source to Sold interviews, where we came up with a new model which we call the chain model. So let's start with kind of the traditional view. Supply chains are complex, so we need to make sure that we understand complex systems. We need to understand how to operate these complex systems. And what we often see in supply chain is we need to understand trade-off decisions, trade-off discussions. So to give you an example, if you have a low service level, you want to discuss, hey, is that something where we need to increase inventory, the cost of inventory trading off with the additional revenue or customer satisfaction? It might be that we say, hey, if we invest into a different logistics strategy, we have a trade-off of service level versus logistics cost. So that needs to be understood. And it sounds simple, but if you apply this from your customer all the way down to your supplier, it starts to be quite complex. So this is something that we need to master. We have technical skills. So this is something, if you think about planning, you need to clearly understand what an MRP is. You need to kind of understand the three-letter acronyms to make sure that you have the baseline. And you need to be also very good in problem solving. That is kind of key to understand, hey, we have an issue here. And I would say 80% of a supply chain manager's daily work is, I have an issue, I need to solve it. So for that, we need problem solve. So that is kind of I would say the technical part. Being also IT savvy, a lot of younger supply chain managers are able to program, right? It helps to be able to write a Python script to analyze huge number of data. Now let me come to the to the more soft skills. And this is what we learned during the interviews. 26 we had 26 contributors that have a background in supply chain, made it to the C-suite, and we kind of condensed the findings of their stories into the chain model. And here, C stands for collaborative. So the essence is really that we need to build relationships internally and externally. So we need to work together along the value chain, along the supply chain, but also with our customers and also with our suppliers. And this kind of is a skill that is often undervalued, where companies pretty much focus on their silos. We need to make sure that we understand the holistic nature. I mentioned already customer to supplier. Here we need to understand the big picture. So H then stands for holistic. That is what we need to master. We need to make sure that we are adaptable, and we make sure that we set up our system to be adaptable. And that is not only in the last 3 years where we had a lot of disruptions that we had to manage. That's also going forward. So the next disruption will be around the corner. And we need to live with that. We need to react. And here we need to understand the right agility. By the way, all the trade-off and problem-solving skills that I mentioned earlier will clearly help. We need to make sure that we are influential. So we empower people. And with this, we can get, let's say, a better result out of our organization. And I would say the most important part, and that's probably what we also will talk about later on, is the N for narrative. So we need to be able to tell the supply chain story in a way that is understood. I talked earlier about we need to master MRP. If I go to the board and mention the word MRP, there's probably only a few people who understand what I'm talking about. So we need to translate this. We need to translate this in very, very clear, simple business language that other people understand us and also appreciate what we do.
Radu?
I think that's pretty comprehensive. Thanks, Knut. Maybe I can just reinforce a little bit. So you have two big buckets: hard skills and soft skills. And actually, if we break it down, hard skills are of course key. I mean, you cannot become a chief operations officer, chief supply chain officer if you don't know operations, if you don't know supply chain, if you've never run a factory or warehouse or I don't know, a logistics center. I mean, all of those are hard skills. But ultimately, what makes the difference, and that's again that came very strongly in the book with 26 the top global chief supply chain officers and CEOs made it very clear. It's the 5 elements that Knut just mentioned of the chain model: collaboration, holistic, adaptable, influential, and narrative. The soft skills side are more important a lot of times than the hard skill side. And even just last night, I was having a discussion. It's not often that I have such discussions. Marissa is the chief supply chain officer of Advent Health, which is one of the largest hospital networks in the United States. They have a huge facilities, 50, 60 hospitals, and she was sharing with me how she ended up doing healthcare supply chain. Even if by design she was industrial engineer, she started in Hershey's in chocolates, and then at some point she made the switch. Then she realized that actually healthcare, there's a lot of things that are quite different, because ultimately in healthcare, it's literally supply chain is about saving people's lives and making sure that you have the right tools for the doctors to do that. But what she realized with her formation with industrial engineering, a lot of the principles, and even if she had to learn all the acronyms of healthcare supply chain and all the 3-letter, 4-letter, 5-letter that she had completely, it took her quite a few years. Ultimately, it was about the soft skills that enabled her to think the big picture, holistic at a business perspective. How can she orchestrate the supply chain in a healthcare environment to add value? And I have a separate, she was extremely successful. That's why she's chief supply chain officer now. I have a separate example. I was giving a keynote a few weeks ago to an apparel company. And then I was we were also sharing about the chain model and the principles of collaboration. And one particular question that came through, yes, but we operate in a very specific. We sell our goods through e-commerce, so we don't sell through, I don't know, supermarkets or stores or other things. So I don't think that collaboration applies to us, or something to that extent. And that's, I think, that where the problem sometimes occurs in supply chain. There's people that are highly trained, super smart, but they get lost in the weeds. They get lost a little bit in the they go so deep in their functional expertise that they fail somehow to see the bigger picture, that ultimately it is the soft skills, it is the collaboration skills that does not matter whether you sell through a supermarket, through a omni-channel, through a I don't know, mom and pop shop for that matter. When you go and talk to your partner, when you go and see what is a win-win, that is a soft skill. It applies wherever there's human to human, the soft skill applies. It does not matter which specific channel you're using. And sometimes that's a little bit still a challenge within the realm of supply chain, to getting lost in this a little bit weeds.
All right. So the soft skills are actually very hard to develop. So let's dive deep into developing these skills. What do you think are the biggest challenges which organizations are facing in terms of developing and retaining the skills which will be required in the future for supply chain? So maybe Knut, we can start with you, and if you have some examples, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so happy to get started. So first, if we really kind of go back to when we first learn supply chain, that's often attending university courses. What we often see is that here it's not necessarily the practical stuff that is taught. It's more the kind of the stuff where we can publish a paper. So this is kind of, hey, by the way, we have these 25 formulas to calculate the lot size. And myself being a professor, I always tell my students, and they are super frustrated when I tell them, look, the stuff that you learn in some of these courses does not apply to reality, right? So out of these 25 models to calculate lot size, what do you think? How many are used in reality? I would say 0.5, right? So this is something where we clearly lack the kind of real training of supply chain. Some of the stuff is also hard to train. To give you an example, whenever you implement an integrated planning process, SNOP or IBP, this is something where we really often struggle because people don't like to collaborate, to our point in the chain model. Teaching this at university, you say, hey, we have demand, we have supply, we bring it together and we decide, oh, okay, what's the problem? Done in 10 minutes. So here kind of teaching the real stuff is super, super important. Now, how do we develop people and how do we retain them? We need to make sure that we have, let's say, we create curiosity, right? So that people are really looking into new stuff. Hey, here I have a new area I want to explore. I might start in whatever area, I go to another area, and with this I complete my end-to-end training, so to say. And we need to make sure that we, as a company, are flexible enough for these people, right? So we see a lot of, also reflecting on what we have in McKinsey, there's a lot of young digital talent. There's different requirements in terms of work flexibility. There's different requirements of kind of hybrid work. And this is something that we need to make sure that we have. And with this, we keep these people. We need to kind of tell them and make this very clear in what we do, that we do not only want to keep them for kind of executing a job, right? We want to make them better people. We want to develop them. We want to kind of make sure that they kind of become exceptionally good. And with this clearly then also benefit for us as a company. Radu.
Well, just to make my own life easier, but Shub, you're the one, and this is not scripted at all, but Shub, you're the one that is head of learning. So why don't you answer your own question? Because I think you should. You've seen quite a lot in the last 6 to 12 months, and yeah, maybe share some perspectives in terms of the things that you've seen that work best when companies look at developing their talent.
Wow, okay. So as the host, I become the speaker now. Thank you very much for that, Radu. But I think for a lot of organizations, one of the struggles is even getting the buy-in from people that they need to understand what Knut said. The people think, oh, I already understand supply chain. So why do I need to attend these extra things? Why do I need to do extra courses, extra training? And what I found the most effective way of getting people is to inspire them through stories. And I think you both have paved the way through Souls to Sold. It's not a book which tells people how do you actually lead in supply chain, step one, step two, step through. These are concrete narratives and stories from people who've been through a similar journey. So a good way to get people to open their mind to learn new skills, unlearn the previous ones, is to say that, look, what you've learned in theory may not have practical implications. Let's speak to somebody who's done that practically in a successful way. What were their challenges? What did they go through? And when people come and tell me that, oh, don't think training has any new use now, there's chat GPT and people can go. Absolutely. For learning the concepts definition, chat GPT is fantastic. But when it comes to learning through other people's experience, what they have gone through, the exact details, how did they win through, the softest side of things, that's where I think the narrative stories, talks of people who've gone through a similar pattern really helps. So I think one of the big challenge which companies face is even getting the buy-in from the executives and the people for whom they are preparing their training, that they need to invest their time in that. And we can open them up by sharing these stories.
And maybe I'll add one additional angle to this is, and Knut has been talking about this a lot, is have supply chain organization allocated a marketing budget to tell their narratives, to share with the organization, both internally as well as externally. Okay, internally, typically you don't need a budget, but okay. Externally, you do what they're doing. Yeah, what are you doing as a supply chain department? And I think that is key for a couple of reasons. One, it is key because if you don't own your narrative as a department, somebody else will. Whether it's finance, whether it's sales, whether it's product, they will then dictate what do you do, what do you stand for, and you will most certainly not like it because it's not in their interest to make you look good, yeah, as supply chain and operations professionals. So it's key that supply chain and operations own their narrative, own when they go to the board and CEO what they stand for, what is the value specifically that they bring to the organization, because based on that they'll get budgets, headcount, power ultimately to do things and to improve things in the organization. Secondly, the narrative is important also for the people within the department. So without naming names, super good FMCG company. They have, in my opinion, one of the best run supply chains in the world. However, they almost never talked about it. And I was sharing with the CSCO, the Chief Supply Chain Officer, I said, but one, do your people even know that they're doing an amazing job? Because usually, no matter how good you are, there's always going to be somebody, CEO, board, the head of the board, chairman, they will say, yeah, do better. I mean, nobody will say, great, next year your target is still the same. No such thing. You can be the best and you're still going to get 120% of whatever, 130% of whatever you have delivered last year. Yeah. So just having that sense of what, but actually, yes, of course, we should always push ourselves, but we are actually doing an amazing job and we should be proud. So that sense of pride, of belonging to a certain department is also key. And that's also key for a third aspect, which is attracting the right talent, attracting the right people, attracting the right minds, young minds into supply chain to make a difference, because you have to have that sense of pride that you're contributing, that you're doing something for the bigger good, which it is indeed, because ultimately if we're going to fix ESG, sustainability, circularity, that all is going to be fixed in supply chain. So all of this, I would say these are three, there's a lot more, three reasons why it's highly important that supply chain executives own the narrative of what they do, the value they bring to the organizations, and are vocal about it, whether it's within the organization and outside the organization through LinkedIn, through conferences, and so on. And just on the point of conferences, maybe one final asterisk thought. It is also important, even if you're good, to benchmark yourself against others. No organization in this world, you name whatever organization, Amazon, Apple, whatever, none of them is good at everything. There's no such thing. They might be good at many more things than most, but one of them is good at every single end-to-end, piece by piece. I have never seen such a thing in my life. So when you go to these conferences as an executive, you can benchmark and see, okay, well, actually on the logistics side, or I don't know, on the accounts payable, or there's aspects where you can always learn and keep yourself open to get new inputs from startups, from even your competition, from your ecosystem, from your partners, from your vendors, and so on. There are companies, again, that are just consciously keeping themselves closed and not going and not participating. I think that is a mistake, and I think we should always keep ourselves open and going to these forums.
That's an excellent point there, Radu, and I'm going to put a shameless plug in here, but I think when we were creating the Alcott Global Supply Chain Academy, we actually reached out to supply chain leaders from different companies to talk about their stories, because it's very important that different people present their perspectives, and there's no right and wrong. You could have one way of doing planning which works for your organization and industry, and another way from another industry, and sometimes just by hearing another story you get brilliant ideas from there. So I love the fact that you talked about that we as supply chain need to talk in the community. As Professor Wilding always says, the competition is not between companies anymore, it's between supply chains they are part of. So let's move on to the next question. And I want to really break it down for our audience here. We've talked a lot about the softer skills, the chain model, collaborative, holistic, adaptable, influential, narrative. How do you go about developing these within your organization? Like, how do you even measure if you're developing these skills in the right way? And what can organizations or individuals do to build these skills? So, Knut, your thoughts on that?
Yes, happy to start. And reflecting on kind of large scale capability programs that we did with our clients, it is so a couple of thoughts. One basic principle is experiential learning. So that basically means that it's not like you listen to something or you read a book or so. You have always a touch and feel. So you have a task, you solve that task, you clearly have kind of the context, you have some pieces of theory, you have some concept and so on, but you immediately apply it. We started with this like 20 years ago when we built our first model factory, where we kind of, for manufacturing, said that, hey, how to teach lean. You cannot teach lean with kind of slides and so on. You need to experience it. So you spend time on the shop floor, you change the workstations, you change the flow, you change the way this is operated. We further developed this now to something like 20 of these digital capability centers, and included also supply chain, where we have this experiential learning in supply chain, where we really kind of operate a supply chain with this we see and we feel. It's like playing an instrument, right? So you playing an instrument, you get excited if you play in a band or in an orchestra, because you can immediately apply. So this is super, super important that people immediately apply the learnings in their day-to-day job. If we now think about the soft skills of the chain model, here, that is something tested, apply it, use it, and also kind of leave a bit your comfort zone. Right? We in supply chain, we are so kind of fixed in our three-letter acronyms that sometimes we don't even try to tell a different story or a different narrative. So this is something that is super, super important. So coming back to the example I mentioned for the one client, where here we basically did an approach where we had kind of 3 different levels of training. We had one foundational where we said, hey, everyone needs to understand holistic, collaborative. They need to understand that we work together. That was done for something like 20% of the company, 6,000 people, in kind of big chunks of 200, 300 people. It was in person. It was before the lockdown, so it was possible in person. And this kind of conveyed the basics. It was also kind of important for them to understand, hey, the transformation is going on. We will have a different operating model going forward. Then we had the people who were kind of, I would say, core and adjacent to supply chain. This were around about 800-900. Here we had a 2 days training, experiential learning. All of us know the beer game, so we played beer games and other stuff to just show what works and also experience failure. And then with this, then kind of bringing together all the concepts, all the technical concepts and the soft concepts. We at the same time also developed trainers out of this class that then could kind of convey the message, right? So there was always classes of 20 to 30 people that we could also have a good discussion. And then we had a masterclass of 5 days where we really went into the details, where we even explained the safety stock formula with square roots and standard deviation. But again, in an experiential setting, focusing on the elements, so to say, of the chain model. Even though the chain model did not exist, now reflecting what we did was kind of covering all of this. And then the last idea or concept of this is also something that is well known. It's an apprenticeship model, right? So if you apprentice, if you have people around you that help you in applying and developing, then this is super, super helpful and will make sure that you apply and you learn the new skills.
I'll just perhaps contradict a little bit, Knut. Actually, reading Source to Soul does help, Knut. I think it's a good.
That's right.
It's a good idea to start there. Joke aside, I would add one element. Always these things work in layers. So for collaboration, I mean, as a principle level, we've presented about the chain model in a lot of conferences. Nobody said anything against it. It makes sense. It's not necessarily something completely new, or I mean, maybe the formula, the way that we've structured it, and the fact that it is very much applicable to supply chain. But these are soft skills. Yeah, it's not the theory of relativity or something. But whether or not people apply it in reality has to come down to a few things, usually related to the top management. So are the top management driving the same behaviors themselves or not? And then, of course, the KPIs of the organizations and the KPIs of the different departments should ideally encourage and work hand in hand with chain, yeah, with collaboration, for example, because there's not few organizations in which actually departments are thrown at each other's necks and are competing somehow. There's companies where literally you have, okay, again, not naming names, you have product A, product B, product C, sales teams, 3 sales teams, and then you see the sales of product A and sales of product B, they're literally undercutting each other for the same client. So then it's like, okay, so what collaboration are we talking about? We're the same company and we're just decreasing our margins because the two heads of the different products, that the 2 different products have their own KPI, so they don't care. I mean, they care about making the sale themselves, not about the good of the company. So I think these 2 really badly need to be aligned. The senior management is aligned, and there's no sort of infighting or misalignment. And then the KPIs should be aligned. And then, of course, it should be cascaded down. I think what Knut shared as an example is very good. Ideally, it should be, we've done some interventions in my past. I used to work in learning and development and talent development. It should also be then correlated in an ideal world in these things to stick. Even a training is not good enough only in and by itself. It should be correlated then to what are you measured against. You personally, me as Radu, as an employee of MNC, I should be then measured on my, in order to get my bonus, on C for collaboration, H for holistic, A for adaptable, I for influential, and N for narrative, just using chain model. You can use whatever models you like, but all of this should be correlated, and then they flow into behaviors that people can observe in the company on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, it's just nice words on a piece of paper somewhere that nobody really cares about.
Yeah, and if I were to add a couple of things, which Radu, you mentioned that training in itself may not be effective alone, but I think mentorship is fantastic, especially if you're driving this initiative in your entire organization, or even as an individual, you can speak to people from different functions, and you don't need to assign somebody an official role of a mentor to be mentored by them. You can have conversations with them to learn different skills from them, and coaching as well, executive coaching, leadership coaching helps a lot. I feel sometimes people have this wrong image of coaching should be done only for performance management, but coaching actually should be done for really increasing the level at which people operate. And I believe all of us here are big proponents of that as well. So there are definitely a lot of these things which individuals can take up upon themselves rather than waiting for organizations. So moving on, finally, I want to ask, what steps can supply chain organizations take to future-proof their team skills, especially now, with the industry rapidly evolving and so many technological advancements, AI happening? How can companies ensure that they are building the right skills? And to give you a quick context of that, just this week, World Economic Forum released their Future of Jobs report, and it says that within the next 5 years, 44% of the workforce will need to reskill their functional skills because AI would be able to take them up. So how would you address that question, Knut?
Yeah, so look, if someone in an organization sits there and says, I wait for my organization to tell me what to do, that's, I guess, not enough. So we need to make sure that as an organization, we foster curiosity. And with this kind of, there was some discussions like 20, 30 years ago to get to this learning organization. And this is really something that is super important. If every one of us should be so curious to learn that we kind of grab these new skills and we play with it, and we then kind of adapt it to our daily job. So this whole discussion on ChatGPT, right? So most of us have played with it, right? And then kind of thought about, hey, how can we use it? How can we kind of use that in our daily work to be better? Or in supply chain, kind of there's, if we would be able to kind of develop a co-pilot next to us. So we kind of do the planning stuff whatsoever, and we have a co-pilot who every now and then kind of provides scenarios and provides insights and says, hey, look into this. This is super interesting. And this is curiosity, so we need to make sure that we get out and learn. One of the contributors of the book told us that she took a Python course during the summer. And we're like, Chief Supply Chain Officer, taking a Python course. Why do you do that? As I need to learn. I need to make sure that I understand how my young colleagues in my team, how they think, how they act, and kind of with this develop myself, right? Attend conferences, reading, watching videos, and with this kind of getting just a new inspirations. For some people, like in my case, it often happens when I walk the dog, right? So you are out in the forest for half an hour, and then I always need to have my phone to note down new ideas that I have. That is something that all of us need to do. And then we need to also foster the idea to kind of try it, apply it, get out of your comfort zone. So the narrative, for example, that for a lot of us in supply chain is not so easy. Tell your grandma what you do for a living. And if she understands, then you cracked it, right? Another contributor of the book also told us that, look, with all of these disruptions, it's so much in the press that my mother, in that case, she did ask the contributor, hey, what's going on in your warehouse? Are you able to still fulfill the stuff? Tell me how that works, right? So here you need to explain, so to say, in simple word, not simplistic, but simple word. You need to tell the narrative that everyone understands. So go out and practice and learn and be curious. This is the skills, the most important skills that an organization needs to embrace in their team, and then you kind of develop on your own.
Fully agree.
Radu.
Right. I don't have necessarily something. I think some good thoughts. Maybe we take some questions.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of questions from the audience. One is very specific question, which is about, are you able to map across supply chain expertise in military, for example, into a civilian supply chain, and what would be the skills required? I'm not sure if either of you would be at a position to answer this.
So if we compare military supply chain to normal supply chain, the interesting thing is that in a normal supply chain, you have your network, so to say, fixed, right? So you have your warehouses, you have your plants, you have your suppliers, and then you optimize the flows within the fixed network. A military network, especially if you are kind of in theater, everything is moving. Your warehouses are moving, the suppliers are moving, and everything is moving. So the idea, the principles, and so on of, hey, we need to keep inventory. We need to make sure that we have high availability. We need to make sure that we plan ahead. Is similar. It's just the nature of the network is completely different, and this is what we need to take into account. And it makes it even more complex than a normal supply chain.
Got it. And so I have a quick question. Would you be able to present examples where you have seen organizations who have successfully worked to keep the skills relevant for their workforce and up to date, or what kind of interventions did they introduce to make that happen? Knut, would you have any examples to share from that?
So one of the examples, and can talk about many more of those, is what I mentioned earlier, right? So you start with a kind of a formal journey, but then at some point in time you're through, so to say, right? And then you need to kind of add on with a mentorship model, with an apprenticeship model, and here you need to kind of then always try out new things. So, for example, you set up a lab, right? So for one client, we set up a lab where we try out new ideas, and with this we kind of increase our skills, improve our skills. Or we had kind of sessions where we did a supply chain narrative competition, right? Where we ask people to tell stories. So this is kind of, you need to kind of ongoing have new ideas and plug in new ideas into the organization that keeps people busy and interested in further advancing their skills. Never stand still.
There was a DHL, actually, and this one I can name, it's a good example. So DHL had, in order to encourage people to take up new projects as well as fail. So I think a big thing with which most organizations in reality, whilst they might say that they encourage failure, they don't, and it's not a safe environment to fail. Yeah, I mean, nobody, typically as humans, we don't like to fail, and we certainly don't want to be pointed out when we failed. So a way to change that narrative of failure at DHL, what they did is they would have these sharing sessions in which teams would share their failures and say, okay, I failed here, this is what I learned, this is what I would do better. And then they would actually give a prize for the biggest failure, but then that was turned out to be a stepping stone, to something that then the company proceeded to do and was good. So that's one example in which you can almost institutionalize, if you want, as a word, and you instill it in the culture that it is okay to fail, it is okay to make mistakes, because that is how you move. That is how you move forward. And that reminds me of a video that has been circulating online in recent days with a basketball player. I mean, I found it to be brilliant. And a reporter asked him, so do you consider your championship a failure now that you've been eliminated from the main cup competition? And the guy responds, well, that's a kind of a silly question, because, is every single year that you work a year that you get promoted? No. So does that mean that every year when you're not promoted is a failure? Of course not. And then the best example was Michael Jordan, played for 15 years. Yes, he won 6 championships, but 9 he didn't. So does that mean that 9 years he was a complete and utter failure? No, it doesn't. So that narrative of failure, I think, is one of the biggest, that if companies change, then and make it, which it should be, like it's normal to fail. Yeah, it's normal to fail. Take the lessons, share the lessons, and move forward. I think that that is one of the fundamental principles that most of this learning, relearning that we will all, by the way, all of us need to, the speed through which we need to learn, relearn, unlearn is unprecedented. I don't think we've ever, we've ever experienced or witnessed the pace that is happening today. I mean, if we think just 4 months ago, 5 months ago, since ChatGPT just took over, and now we have thousands and thousands of AI applications. So fundamentally, we will be in a continuous change mode. What we learn in school, by the end of the 3 years, 4 years of university, I would almost bet that is obsolete already with the things moving in the velocity that they're moving today. So I'd say fundamentally, if organizations somehow manage to allow failure, to make it safe to fail, I think people would then be more safe to experiment, to take on things, to take on new projects, try out things, to try out new skills, and that would, by and large, make the difference between highly successful companies of the future and present and the ones that are not so successful.
All right. So, look, we have so many comments. I can't tell you all. The comment section on LinkedIn Live is buzzing. But I'm going to close this session on this fantastic note that we all need to learn, relearn, unlearn, learn again. We may have to really discard what we've learned academically because the practical world is changing so fast. So thank you very much for your time, Knut and Radu, for today, sharing with us the skills needed for supply chain and for the future leaders of supply chain. And to all our audience today, thank you very much for joining, for your comments, your questions, for agreeing, for not agreeing on some of the points. We will come back to you with any specific details you've asked, and you can follow our guests on their LinkedIn profile. They are linked in the description of this live. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.